Have you ever wondered how we went from this to this? Let's find out. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the history of communication, as well as its history as an academic field of study. I'm going to focus on 6 historical periods, namely early history, classical period, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, Enlightenment and the modern era, and the 20th century. I will also give a brief background of communication as an academic discipline and how the history of communication affects the discipline. But why do we need to study the history of communication? In order to understand an academic discipline, we must first understand its history. Just as communication requires context, communication as an academic discipline also requires a context, and that is by understanding its history. Understanding the history of communication will help us determine the next direction for communication. How did humans start to communicate? Archaeological and anthropological records suggest that primitive humans used symbols for communication. Not only they used tools for their everyday survival, but they also used tools to make symbols for communication. One example is a cave painting, where primitive humans create pigments made from animal blood or plants and fruits, and use these pigments to draw and paint the cave walls depicting of their everyday life or instructing and warning others about animals that they hunt, eat, or encounter. This may be an early example of the use of language. As soon as humans discovered language, they were more able to communicate with each other. Language can be in any form, whether in speech or sound, writing or symbols, performance, or even material signals. Some even use drums or smoke to communicate. Indigenous peoples use spoken and written language, cultural materials, and oral narratives to communicate and also preserve their culture and tradition. Ancient Indian literature suggests the importance of communication to Indians, where they worship Vak, the Indian goddess of speech. We now move forward to the classical period in ancient Greece, where the formal study of communication began. Democracy and scholarship in ancient Greece enabled the study of communication, particularly rhetoric. Back then, rhetoric was the answer to the pressing need of the people. At that time, there is a need to present cases at court, and that led intellectuals and teachers such as Corax and Titius to teach citizens how to make speeches, develop and present persuasive arguments, and refute other people's arguments. There are also a group of teachers called sophists, who teach their students to adjust their ideas to specific contexts, even to the point of even bending the truth, in order to create arguments that move the audience, mostly through an emotional appeal. That's why the word sophistic means deceptive. But teachers such as Aspasia, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle laid the foundations of teaching and studying rhetoric. Their study and practice of rhetoric placed high value on oration and argumentation, putting emphasis on credibility, emotion, and logic to persuade, and providing guidelines for public presentations. Aristotle believed that communication is the key for people to be effective citizens, because having the skill in communication or rhetoric will enable them to engage in discussion about the issues of the day. This became his motivation to teach rhetoric to people using the principles of ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos simply means the speaker's credibility that should match on what he or she is saying. Pathos is the use of speech styles to create an emotional appeal. Finally, logos is the use of logic in your arguments. All of them are important in order to make an effective and persuading speech. Ancient Rome adopted ancient Greece's idea of rhetoric, and scholars such as Cicero and Quintilian saw the relationship and applicability of rhetoric in politics. Cicero developed the idea of rhetoric of ancient Greece and came up with his 5 canons of rhetoric, namely invention, arrangement, expression, memory, and delivery. Now let's go to the Middle Ages. The spread and institutionalization of Christianity in medieval Europe halted the flourishing of ideas from the classical period. That means rhetoric and communication study is considered pagan and corrupted. But the church still embraced several aspects of communication study because they were too valuable and can be used to serve their purposes, such as developing better sermons or letter writing skills to persuade people to convert to Christianity. Thus, communication is focused on oral and written persuasion and public presentation for the purposes of the church agenda. One of the scholars in this era who pushed the church to develop the idea of communication study that originated during the classical period was Augustine. He reasoned out that knowledge of communication will help move people toward the truth, which for him was the Word of God. Although intellectual development in the Middle Ages in Europe is stagnant, other parts of the world such as the Arab region and China have experienced their own golden ages during this period of history. During the Islamic Golden Age, the study of communication focused on interpreting Islamic law through linguistics and rhetoric. The Tang Dynasty in China regarded communication skills such as speech and writing as important skills in civil service. Thus, teachers and tutors teach rhetoric and calligraphy, along with philosophy, arts, and the sciences. The Renaissance period in Europe brought back the ideas from the classical period. As more people continued to challenge the ideas of the church, more ideas from the classical period were deconstructed, and fresh opportunities for scholarly thinking emerged. These include the deconstruction of communication studies, and scholars such as Francis Bacon and Ramus focused on the relation of truth, ethics, and morals in communication. Communication studies continue to develop during the Enlightenment and the modern period. The Industrial Revolution brought technological advancements, and the invention of the printing press made communication more accessible to everyone. Communication studies involve studying the written form of communication, as books and newspapers changed the way people learned and also communicated. Throughout the modern era, communication studies branched out from rhetoric to fields such as journalism, drama and performance, and even to the social sciences such as psychology and sociology. As we move forward to communication in the 20th century and in the present time, we have seen how communication drastically developed during the modern period. Rapid technological advancements and the phenomenon of globalization have broadened the study of communication, providing limitless areas of study in this field. The invention of radio and television led to the emergence of mass communication and media studies, while the invention and commercialization of computers, smartphones, and the internet led to the emergence of digital media. The 20th century also saw the institutionalization of communication studies in universities and the formation of various organizations of communication study, particularly in the US. Changes in society provided an opportunity on how these changes impacted human communication. Communication scholars analyzed how communication helped Hitler rose into power, and how communication through studying media and propaganda impacted the Cold War. Communication scholars also analyzed how social movements, such as the civil rights movement in America, utilized communication in forwarding their advocacies, and how this resulted in social change. Communication was also involved in studying power, and how communication can be used to empower different sectors of society. Because of this, communication has become the subject of academic fields such as the social sciences and education. From simply public speaking and rhetoric, communication evolved into journalism, visual and broadcast media, interpersonal communication, computer-mediated communication, social media, and other forms of communication studies. Now, what are the current trends of communication as a field of study? According to Robert Craig, the focus varies depending on the region. Communication studies in America focus on empirical research on media or journalism, speech communication, rhetoric, and interpersonal communication, while political communication, cultural studies, or intercultural communication, and technology and communication are the trends in Europe. In Africa and in the Middle East, the current trends in communication study are development communication, health communication, cultural studies, media studies, and journalism. The Asia and the Pacific focused more on career-oriented media education such as journalism, advertising, marketing, public relations, post-colonial education, and cultural studies. Notice here that trends emerge depending on the region's history and context. In summary, the rich history of communication as an intellectual discipline, as well as an everyday practice, shows how communication was developed and continues to develop to respond to the changing needs of individuals and society. Early history shows how language became a tool for communication. The classical period focused on rhetoric to create communities and to enable people to participate in a democratic society. The Middle Ages showed how communication is used to serve a particular group or agenda. The Renaissance period started to deconstruct communication study and give way to modern communication. Communication in the modern era until the present time has been formally institutionalized and continues to expand, which also leads to the debate on communication as an academic discipline. Some claim that communication is not a discipline due to its diverse and broad nature. Others claim otherwise because they see that communication has a distinct nature and the discipline has an applied emphasis. But one thing is for sure, communication is a highly interdisciplinary field. It is a product of both the humanities and the social sciences. And the field of communication adopts methods, theories, and concepts from different disciplines to explain us, the society, and the world. Finally, communication is not just an academic discipline. It is an empowering discipline. We don't just study communication to understand and explain things. We study communication to help and empower ourselves and the people around us. People use communication to inspire others, to give hope to those who are hopeless, and to give an opportunity to speak up and stand up for what is right. And that is why communication is very important in our everyday lives. Thank you for watching.